Why would you think I'd do that?
Why? Why? How about because this is the most important fucking thing to ever happen in the history of the world? How about that?
What if the very man who unlocked the secret to the deadliest weapon in history also carried the heaviest burden of guilt? This is the story of Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb whose legacy still divides the world. In 1924, a young Oppenheimer begins his study of physics at Cambridge. During one lab work, he spills reagents, and the teacher tells him to start again. Robert says he has to go to Niels Bohr's lecture, but the teacher orders him to finish his work. After waiting until everyone leaves, he stabs an apple, lying on the table with potassium cyanide, and then sneaks off to Bohr's lecture. But the next day he comes to his senses and runs to the classroom to get an apple there. He meets Bohr and prevents him from eating. The poisoned apple Bohr is impressed by Oppenheimer's knowledge and advises him to change universities to one that will help him better fulfill his potential. To a meeting where the Senate is considering Louis Strauss for Secretary of Commerce. Strauss is questioned about Oppenheimer, and he expresses his negative attitude towards him, claiming that he is linked to communist circles. He also has a personal grudge that dates back to when they first met Strauss as head of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission offers Robert a position at Princeton University, but Oppenheimer declines, and Albert goes away paying no attention to Strauss finishing his study. In Gingen, Robert attends a lecture by Heisenberg. The latter praises Robert's scientific work and offers to do research together, but Oppenheimer refuses, saying that he plans to return to the United States. Robert starts teaching at Berkeley. He starts his lectures with only one student, but soon, thanks to word of mouth, their number begins to grow rapidly at the hearing. Strauss informs that the FBI started collecting a dossier on Oppenheimer as soon as he returned to the US. Robert attends a meeting of the Communist Party USA where he meets Håkan Chayler and Jean Tetlock. He has an affair with Jean, but their relationship does not go too smoothly because of the constant mood swings of the girl. The problems in the communist relationship are exacerbated by news from the world of science. The Germans have managed to split the uranium atom. The scientist reflects on all this and realizes that if they really succeed, the released neutrons can start a chain reaction that can be used in a bomb. Shortly after this article comes out, the next one follows. Hitler invades Poland starting World War II. During a regular Communist Party meeting, Robert meets Catherine Pun and they become romantically involved. Catherine leaves her husband and marries Robert. But Robert, despite his marriage, did not stop hanging out with Jean at the hearing of his case. Oppenheimer admits that the neutrality of the communists at the beginning of the war greatly undermined his trust in them. He says all this, meets General Leslie Groves, who invites him to become the director of the Manhattan Project to build an atomic bomb. The general is concerned that the Nazis could develop such a devastating weapon, plus they have a huge head start on developing it. Robert says the US has only one chance to get ahead of Hitler. Anti-Semitism will prevent him from allowing Jewish scientists such as Heisenberg to develop the bomb. Robert argues that scientists from other countries who fled to the US from Hitler's repression should be involved in their development. General Groves does not like the idea, but Oppenheimer convinces him nonetheless that this is the only hope of winning the nuclear race for the needs of the Manhattan Project. A separate city is being built in Los Alamos for scientists and their families at the same time. Oppenheimer and Groves travel around the country, gathering the best scientists to build the atomic bomb. Some of the scientists don't like the idea of using their knowledge to create weapons of mass destruction. Sometime later at their first meeting, a serious problem with the calculations comes up. Robert tells the scientists to do the calculations again, and he himself goes to consult Einstein. There are fears that the uncontrolled decay of uranium could start a chain reaction that would not stop and would destroy the entire world. Robert asks Einstein to double-check the calculations, but he says it is Robert's work, not his. Albert's only parting request is that if these calculations are correct, he will inform the Nazis so that neither side destroys the world back at Los Alamos. Robert is informed that they have double-checked the calculations and the probability of a man-made apocalypse is close to zero. A few months later, Håkan Chayler hints to Robert that it would be a good idea to share their findings with the Soviet Union, but Robert refuses. The events of the movie move back during the hearings on Strauss's nomination as Secretary of Commerce. The Senate announces that a certain scientist will be called to testify Strauss fears. In 1954, events go back in time again at a meeting in Los Alamos. Scientists discuss the destructiveness of the atomic bomb, and one of the scientists proposes the idea of a hydrogen bomb, which would be hundreds of times more powerful than the atomic bomb. But since it would still have to be based on the atomic bomb, they decide to shelve this idea. In 1949, discussing the first nuclear bomb test by the Soviet Union, Oppenheimer proposes to start negotiations with the Soviets to settle nuclear armament, but Strauss proposes to start building a hydrogen bomb to have an advantage over the Soviets. Back in 1943, General Groves comes to Robert and reprimands him for traveling with another scientist to a different branch of the Manhattan Project. He demands that secrecy protocols be followed and that each employee know only what they are working on at the hearing. However, the general expresses his firm belief that despite repeated violations of security protocols, relationship with Jean is also called into question, and it is shown in flashbacks that he continued their affair. He confesses the affair to Catherine, who is present in the room, and she leaves the following witness, Colonel Boris Pash, who was responsible for the secrecy of the Manhattan Project. Is called in for questioning. The colonel reports that one day Oppenheimer tried to hint about a certain Soviet network of spies who offered to pass information to him through an intermediary. Boris wanted to know the name of this intermediary, but Robert refused, not wanting to cause trouble for Chevalier. However, a few months later, he did give a name at Christmas. Bohr arrives at Los Alamos, stranded in Europe due to the Nazi occupation. He gives the scientists some advice and warns Oppenheimer that he is giving humanity a weapon that could destroy them themselves. At the same time, Robert is informed of Jean Tetlock's death. She had taken pills and drowned herself in the bathtub. Quarrels begin in the team of scientists as one of the scientists still continues to work on the hydrogen bomb and does not fulfill his duty. The Atomic Energy Commission discusses the feasibility of a hydrogen bomb. Oppenheimer again suggests creating a commission to internationally regulate nuclear weapons rather than increasing their numbers. He says that if we build such a bomb, the Soviets will have no choice but to build their own. At the same meeting, Robert meets William Borden, who sometime later will write a detailed report to the FBI that Oppenheimer sabotaged the creation of the hydrogen bomb in what he was assisted by Robert's personal file, discuss Hitler's death and Germany's imminent surrender. Some scientists question whether the bomb should be used anywhere other than a test site. Oppenheimer addresses the participant, justifying the use of nuclear weapons against Japan since the alternative to the bomb is a naval landing, which would probably take more lives. Oppenheimer's team prepares for the first test detonation of the atomic bomb called Trinity. On the day before the explosion, Robert goes up to the bomb himself to realize the magnitude of what is to come. The test is scheduled for the early morning of the 16th of July. Oppenheimer and Groves spend a sleepless night in the bunker, fearing that the explosion could, in theory, destroy the entire world. The team stocks up on sunglasses and welding glasses to witness the blast for themselves. The timer counts down the final seconds, ratcheting up the tension, a blinding flash. A streak of light pierces the dark sky, turning night into day, and now I am become death. The destroyer of worlds, the test is a success, and an enthusiastic crowd congratulates Oppenheimer soon. The scientists build 2 more bombs and send them to the military. Robert begins to be tormented by moral dilemmas about using such a powerful weapon against humans. President Truman's speech about the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is broadcast on the radio. Everyone rejoices as the war will soon be over, but Oppenheimer begins to suffer a guilty conscience because of the victims. He gives a fiery speech to the team, but at the same time, he imagines how the bomb will incinerate everyone. His picture is printed on the cover of Time, and he is even invited to a reception with the President Truman. Initially congratulates him on developing the bomb, but when Oppenheimer says he has blood on his hands, Truman gives him a handkerchief and tells him to wipe it off, then banishes him and calls him a crybaby. Years later at the hearing, it is revealed that after the war, Oppenheimer spent all his efforts to contain the US nuclear capability. This leads to a conflict of interest with Strauss, who uses his connections to repress Robert's loved ones. It becomes clear that it was Strauss who leaked Oppenheimer's dossier to Borden and also arranged a closed hearing on Robert's case in an attempt to destroy his reputation. Robert is asked when his views on developing nuclear weapons changed, and he replies that it happened when he realized that US would use any weapon they had at the end of the hearing. The commission recognizes Robert Oppenheimer as loyal to the United States, but he is stripped of his security clearance and loses his political influence when former technician David Hill testifies against Strauss on behalf of the majority of scientists. Because of his actions against Oppenheimer, the scientist reports that Strauss did. So, not out of concern for the safety of the country, but because of personal grievances, hearing when Oppenheimer called Strauss's ideas little more useful than a sandwich. Strauss has denied a ministerial nomination, and among those rejected is a young Senator John F. Kennedy. To that fateful conversation with Einstein by the lake, Albert tells Robert that one day, when they have punished you enough, they will invite you to the White House and give you an award, but it won't be for you, it will be for them. Oppenheimer's story is not just about science or war, it's a powerful reminder of the human cost behind the weapons we create. As we look to the future, his legacy challenges us to ask, can humanity control the forces it unleashes, or will history repeat itself?